This is Captain E, and I want to tell you about a charity that is near and dear to my heart. The Shawn Jenkins Children's Hospital at MUSC is responsible for saving my niece's life and so many others on a daily basis. Hooked on Miracles is our King Mackerel tournament in Charleston on July 14th through the 16th, and it's the oldest King Mackerel tournament in South Carolina. We support the Children's Hospital with 100% of our proceeds. This event is a fun-filled weekend of fishing with family and friends and raising money for this great cause. You can make a difference too by going to www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com and join our efforts as a sponsor or participant. That's www.hookedonmiracleskmt.com for all the information. Thanks to all of our sponsors and especially Key West Boats for keeping this great event going every year. We'll see y'all in Charleston in July. Michelob Ultra and Mich Ultra wholesaler Better Brands Incorporated are excited to announce a new partnership with Sober Skipper, part of the Sea-Tow Foundation. While we know consumers enjoy relaxing days on the water with ultras in hand, it's important to remember to drink and boat responsibly. Choose to be or to designate a sober skipper before leaving the dock. Do it for your family and friends, your passengers, and everyone else on board. Michelob Ultra salutes all sober skippers who take the pledge. Cheers, and we'll see you on the water.
Realtree has always had a connection to the fishing industry and the outdoor lifestyle. In 2016, Realtree expanded on the traditional business of creating the world's most effective camouflage patterns to create a fishing brand and family of patterns designed to connect the woods to the water and strengthen the bond between the two worlds. We couldn't be more excited to be working with the industry's top brands, retailers, and anglers to continue our growth, and we hope that you will join us. Enjoy Realtree fishing patterns inshore, offshore, on the lake, or at the dock. Learn more about the extensive line Realtree fishing patterns, apparel, gear, and more at Realtree.com.
One thing that all of us outdoorsmen and women love to do is travel, whether to fish new waters or to chase wild game in other areas that we may not get opportunities at in our own area. Our friends at Monster Reservations Group want to open up an entirely new chance for you to travel and enjoy the outdoors or just relaxing. With over 40 destinations in the U.S. like beautiful Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Wisconsin Dells and Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, Poconos, Pennsylvania, and even our backyard here at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And many more. They are going to give you twice the vacation. That's right. Pay for 4 nights and you're going to get 4 nights for free. That's $498 for an 8-night stay at one of our incredible destinations, and that's for simply listening to Trilogy Outdoors. Go book your trip and get all the details at www.monsterrg.com. That's monsterrg, all lowercase.com. Pay less for an incredible opportunity to explore the outdoors in your choice of over 40 destinations. Book your trip now.
Trilogy Outdoors.
All right, folks, it's time for another exciting episode of Trilogy Outdoors, and I'll tell you, the partner here, Senator Stephen Goldfinch, has lined us up an incredible guest and one that I'm familiar with too. But you got one of your diving partners with us.
Yeah, I felt like it was time for us to go in a different direction, the direction of down. So we've done everything so far. We've talked with famous big game hunters, Jim Shockey. We've talked with famous musicians and also hunters, Ted Nugent. We've talked with famous fishermen. And now it's time to talk about what's under the ocean. And so I am proud to have my dive buddy here, Kent Rogerson. Kent and I have been diving. How long have we been diving together, Kent?
2003 or 4, I guess, somewhere in there.
Almost 20 years. Almost 20 years we started diving together, and it's been great. We have, I think it's safe to say, more dives than anybody else off of South Carolina, and I'm trying not to exaggerate as much as I can there, but for 20 years we dove. For the first 10 years we dove hard,
ridiculously hard for the first decade. Almost needing to seek some help.
Did have to seek some help, and we can get into that. We can get into that at some point in time. But did have to seek some medical attention.
Yeah. So who has had to? Never mind. We got a lot more to go into. I was like, who has had to spend time in a
I have
chamber?
I have.
Amazingly, not me.
You haven't?
No.
I would have thought of the two of y'all, your crazy butt would have been the one in it.
I'm the guy that's had to have the orthopedic surgeons and fingers and stuff sewn back on, but I've not bent myself yet.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a good ride for us though. We've spearfished in quite a few tournaments together. We won quite a few tournaments together on the same boat together. And the interesting thing about diving to me, and I think to our audience, is going to be the different perspective, right? We were talking about this earlier. When you're fishing, you look at a bottom machine and you see squiggly lines.
Absolutely.
and you see what the bottom is and you say, oh, you think that's a grouper? Do you think that's a snapper? Oh, look, that's up in the water column. Do you think that's a dolphin or a tuna or what is that? We've actually had the opportunity to go and look at it, and so we've got a different perspective, and we can give that perspective to fishermen.
It certainly sharpens your ability to target fish and know what you're doing when you've looked at your electronics. I mean, it's just like looking at a radar and then picking your head up and looking at the coastline. You know, if you're sitting there looking at a bottom machine and you think that you're looking at something and you're reading the information that the bottom machine is sending back to you and saying, okay, I should interpret this, one way or the other. If you take, literally thousands of dives where you're looking at a bottom machine and then instantly swimming down and confirming or even eliminating what you thought you were looking at on the bottom machine, I think it makes a much sharper fisherman at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I want to sort of zoom in on that. I mean, we can talk about anything diving, spearfishing related, and we will. But for the purposes of 98% of our audience who are fishermen, I want to focus on a little bit on how this parallels to fishing on the top. So one of the things that you and I have always, what we've learned, what we've seen over the years, what we've observed with our own two eyes is that the biggest spots, the spots that you see that are just the prettiest ledges you've ever seen, it pops up 10, 12 foot, they're not, most of the time, they're not the most productive spots.
Maybe productive in volume, but not productive if you're looking for
that's right.
The genuine trophy fish, the one that you want to smile and take a picture of. You're right. It seems like we started off doing what most people did, which was go find some big structure. You ride out to the horseshoe and here's a 300-yard long ledge that at its biggest point might be 8, 9, 10 feet of overhang, and while it's beautiful to dive and fun to look at, none of us can outswim even the slowest fish. So the idea of trying to chase them up and down these long ledges is almost ludicrous.
Yeah, right. So at the end of the day, a lot of times what we'll look for is small stuff that has a couple feet of relief on it, maybe a rock pile somewhere, a short ledge that easily, when you're descending down on the fish and you see the fish, what you want the fish to do is to get up underneath that rock where you can get to him, right? I mean, that's sort of the idea, and I mean from a spearfishing perspective, that's sort of the idea, is to find the spots that have not really an escape route, I guess is the best way to put that.
Well, have a spot where the hopefully resident large trophy fish feels comfortable, thinks he can go, 1 or 2 or 3 hiding spots, not 300.
All right.
If you're gonna try and roll down, swim, and capture a nice fish, you want to be able to roll in and do it with the least amount of swimming around as possible. So, yeah, that has definitely worked out for us.
Well, it sounds to me like y'all are hunting more than fishing.
Spearfishing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's what it is. I tell people all the time. It's hunting, it's fishing, it's exploring, it's adventure. I joke around and say sometimes I guess you could even be hunted a little. Yeah. So many people think that it's not as bad as what people think. They think that sharks are out there and it's so dangerous. We say this all the time, if sharks were after human beings, neither one of us would be here, right?
Yeah. But I tell you, well, number one, off of our coast, we're here located in beautiful Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. We fish anywhere from Charleston. traditionally fish anywhere from Charleston to Frying Pan Shoals off of North Carolina. That would be what we would consider sort of our core competency.
Home,
right. I mean, the shark the shark population has boomed. Since I was a kid diving off of our coast, I mean, the shark population has boomed.
Bull sharks especially.
Bull sharks especially. Used to be a lot of tiger sharks, used to be a lot of sand tiger sharks. Nowadays you see bulls, you see duskies, you see sandbars. You know, you see a lot of pelagic sharks that you didn't used to see. And they have become more aggressive, and I think that's because there's more of them, and there's less of us. Supply and demand.
They're competing for food.
Supply and demand.
That's what I was going to say. When he dove off the boat with me, he had to deal with a shark. He had to deal with a bull shark.
Last year was one of the worst years that we had, and that's saying something because the year before that was one of the worst years we had. It was about every single dive you had to deal with a shark. Now I want to get back to something Kent said, and we'll get finished with sharks here in a minute. But I want to get back to something Kent said. He said that if sharks were hunting us, we wouldn't be in the ocean, and I think that's absolutely true. And it's not as bad as most people think it is. That's absolutely true, but I think that's true for somebody that's been doing it for 20 or 30 years. If you stick the novice, the guy that just started diving, into some of the situations that we traditionally get ourselves in deep water with sharks and fish, I think they flip out.
Well, sharks are like any other animal. They have a demeanor. Once you're around, so you show up at somebody's house and they've got they got a Rottweiler or whatever. Within just a few minutes, the average person can tell whether that Rottweiler's fine, friendly, I should keep my distance, or get my behind back in the truck, right? And I think that being a spear fisherman and having basically their lunch on your side, you get a different perspective, because you get to see when a shark's docile and just checking you out and swimming around. And then also too, you can mess up and push things too far every once in a while, and you see when they get more aggressive and start seeing you as a meal source. And if you watch and you pay attention and you stay calm, you can react properly in those situations and not make things worse. Unreasonable reaction is usually what gets dangerous situations going quickly, or takes a dangerous situation and turns it into a really dangerous situation.
So undoubtedly, like I said, I've been diving with you for 20 years. You're one of the best spear fishermen in the nation, and there's that. I'm not joking. You truly are one of the best spear fishermen in the nation, and located right here in beautiful South Carolina. And if you're looking at a shark, let's say that you've got a stringer full of fish, and we've been shooting fish, and you got blood in the water column, and you're looking at, let's say, a bull shark. A bull shark gives you, comes by, gives you a swim by, and you take a look at him. What are you looking for when you see that shark? What are you looking for in terms of the demeanor that you were talking about with a dog?
Well, you see their pace, and they start to act a little erratic. They start doing a couple little flip backs, quick circles on you. A lot of times the bull sharks, it's like they're watching until you start to break the bottom and you're starting to leave the bottom. And, that's when you've already made a ruckus and like you said, you got blood and water, and all of a sudden they come in and they just start testing you, and you can tell it. You can tell they're testing you, and when they finally get their muster up, you can see them to kind of arch their back a little bit and start to. I compare it sometimes to a dog getting his hair up on his back. You see it. When you see it, you know it, and that's the point where if you can get the fish off of you and get them on up and kind of take a, it's been my experience, and I know yours too. If you take a posture of, hey man, you don't scare me, and even head towards the shark, they second guess it. You can tell they second guess, and I don't know how many second guesses you get, but you get a few, which gives you time to usually clear the fish off of you and get going.
So one of the things that I've always done, and I'm sure you do too, I've watched you plenty around sharks. If we get to a bottom and I see a shark that I think, he's positioned in a way where he'd be the right one to cause you problems, It's not like you saw him on the way down. It's not like you saw him passing you. He's just hovering over the ledge waiting for a meal. First thing I do, I go straight to him and I just poke the mess out of his tail and run him off as fast as I can. Because you want to show him, I think, don't you think?
Oh, no, for sure.
You want to show him you're the alpha, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they say the best defense is a good offense. You know, if you roll up and you swim straight to them, usually you can make them run off for a minute.
Right.
If they come back, maybe you got to show them a little bit harder. One thing that I always thought was funny, when I first started spearfishing, I heard about guys shooting sharks. A shark came after me, I shot the shark, had to shoot the shark, and you hear that story after story, and just literally at this point now with thousands of dives, and it's not the sharks that you would think that you would have to shoot. You don't have time to shoot.
Yeah.
When they come into a point where you think that you're sticking stuff at them.
It's a million miles an hour.
Right. You're just shoving a gun at them, or you're shoving the butt of the gun or the side of the gun at them,
or your fins, or what.
Right. Well,
anything
but what you've got. But those situations are so rare. I'm sitting here thinking we're on this podcast and we went straight to the shark talk. But
I could just say, because people listening probably in their one mind about diving, maybe the hold up and why they don't do it is because of sharks. I mean, I would almost venture to guess that. But I must say this much: some of the video that you and Rich Taylor gave me several years back, good Lord, I think it's been like 15, 14 years, whatever, was one of you swimming along a ledge. See if you remember this. You were swimming along the ledge, Rich was videoing, and there was a tiger shark that kept swimming.
Right.
He was swimming in the ledge right beside you. And you'd kind of go over to the side, and he'd peek up. And he'd go back down, and you kept going. And you reached over at one point in time and just kind of hit him with the butt, like you were saying, and he swam off.
Yep.
And that was it.
So he didn't want any problems, and I didn't have any fish yet. So, I think we go to the shark stories just because they're fun and they're exciting and they're things that get your heart racing. We watch I grew up racing motocross and we watch a supercross race, and the second somebody gets out of shape on the coming through the whoops wide open, somebody like me ends up on my edge of my seat. And I'm like, so the exciting things that get our heart pumping are what we end up sharing stories about. The opposite side of that is diving's one of the most calming, relaxing things you ever do. Sometimes you're sitting there on like a deco stop, and you almost have to remind yourself that you are supposed to be watching computers and dive time, and not just daydreaming about how great life is. It's different.
I tell you, when we were young and dumb, I think we had a lot of competition going, self-competition and competition among others on the boat.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, right. And and in my older age, I've come to the conclusion I do this for fun, not for competition. And so, I'm and you're probably the same way now too. But
I'm not competitive at all.
No, that's not true. But my point is, I'm not looking to shoot 10 or 12 little fish, right? For sure. And just to put meat on the boat. I mean, we get plenty of grouper and hogfish and what. I'm looking for a big fish, and I'll pass over a dozen 12-pound scamps or 12-pound gags. It's probably a better way to put that. I'll pass over a dozen 12-pound gag grouper for one 20-pound scamp all day long.
For sure.
All day long. And so it's just, eventually what was hard and, adrenaline filled, hard, sometimes competitive, lots of times heart racing, sweating underwater, it has become what you were just saying. It's become more of a calming, enjoyable experience with the chance at a trophy fish every now and then.
Right. I would agree. I mean, we used to, I remember us leaving at sun up and diving until sundown just to make sure that we got, when we showed back up at the dock, each of us had our, prize fish that we could show, not just one or two of us doing good, It's we're getting older.
Which, yeah, we are. Which became problematic for me health-wise and for you health-wise in some ways too. But I've been bent how many times, Kent?
Quite a few, but I got one stuck out in my head that I'll never forget. we packing up. I think we finished our dive pretty shallow. We might have been in the parking lot, and my son was probably 14 at the time, 15 at the time, and he was going to run the boat home, and so he's up there, putting everything in the computer to head to the South Mountain in Georgetown. And Steve and I flopped down the bean bags in the back, and Stephen says to me, he said, look, man, he said, I think I've taken a hit. He said, if Renee doesn't see it, don't say anything to her. I don't want to scare her. And I look over, and he's holding his forearm, and his forearm is blown up like an inner tube tire, like an inner tube that's got a bubble on the side of it. And I was like, oh my God! I'm sitting there wanting to call the Coast Guard, get a helicopter. Anyway, we ended up stopping, and he took a high percentage pony bottle, and went back down to 20 feet and sat there and breathed the bottle out. Got back on the boat. His arm was normal, and we went home.
Yeah, and what you mean by a high percentage pony bottle? So a system that probably not endorsed by Patty or anybody else, but something that we developed years ago. Is recompression, right? I mean, that's the best way to put that, is recompression. And you want to describe that system?
Well, help me out with recompression.
Well, so the recompression is that is a yellowbird goldfinch thing. So the idea behind it, if you think about a decompression chamber, what they do is they bring you back under pressure and make those tiny little bubbles that have expanded shrink back down, right? And once they get them shrunk back down and under control, they ease the pressure off very slowly, while feeding you enriched oxygen.
And all that nitrogen that's stuck somewhere, that's what we're calling the bends, all that nitrogen that's stuck somewhere, either in a joint or in a muscle or, God forbid, in your brain or in your heart, all that nitrogen eventually, if you do it slowly enough, absorbs back into your system.
Right.
That's what you wanted to do, is absorb back into your system.
If that's the concept, theoretically, if you're out on a boat and you feel like you may have, if you've taken something major, obviously you seek medical help. But if you got something minor going on and you sense that that's what's going on, what seems to work in the real world is taking enriched air, or just 50%, 75%, shoot even straight oxygen if you got it. Go back down, 20 feet or so, and hang out there as long as you can, and then ease yourself to the surface. Seems like it's worked. I've actually watched it work in his case.
It's worked for us, yeah.
Yeah, thank God. The only times I've ever done it is been when
Stephen had to do it.
well. So here's the thing. There are times where, because he's taken multiple of these hits, where he's more susceptible, right? So he always drives these days slightly more conservatively than I do, because I've not taken the hits. And then also too, when he does extra long, so it sounds like we're crazy, but we're not. He actually takes extra long, whatever the dive profile is, he takes extra long to come up. He takes extra time on his decompression stops. He takes extra time on his safety stops. Uses slightly richer air on his safety or last eco stop than what I do, and I stay with him. If I'm done and I'm clear and my computer tells me I'm good to go, if I'm diving by myself, I go to the surface and get out of the water. If I'm with him, I just hang out with him until his stuff's done, which is extra, just extra safe for me. And then he's never by himself doing it. If there's something going on. You never can tell. You could have a hammerhead show up behind you didn't realize was there, and somebody's in the water with you and points it out.
Which has happened.
Which has happened.
Quite a few.
Just stuff like that. So we're sitting here talking about some of the crazier stuff because it's the fun stuff to talk about.
That's the fun stuff.
Yeah, it's the fun stuff to talk about. But
I told you the first time I met Mr. Steve Goldfinch,
right,
his dad,
right,
he looked right at me and he said, "So here's the deal. I'm going to get the fire truck, a.k.a. the four-wheeler with the fire thing, because we're going to end up having to put a fire, or we're going to have to call 911 or something," he said, "because you need to program 911 in your phone really good if you're going to be hanging out with my son." He said, "Just be prepared."
Oh, Lord.
Now I know where it's all coming from.
So here's the thing. It's not quite as bad as it sounds. And if you think about it, I'm going to say I'm going to say with the salvage boat and all the spearfishing, I'd have to really sit down and try to do a serious thought, but I'm going to say it breaks a couple thousand dives together.
Oh, yeah.
That we've made together. Not just, I mean, he's made a bunch more without me, and I've made a bunch more without him. Yeah. But I'm going to say conservatively, I'm going to give it a couple thousand dives. That's a lot of diving. It's the average avid diver's lifetime times 100. Yeah. So it's a lot of diving that we've done, and it's also, you know, you two guys that are competitive and go all out on a lot of things. So, you know, you end up getting some stories. But most of the stories are about just awesome days that you're just sitting there going, well, shoot, they're all awesome days, even the ones that we got the crazy stories out of. Here we are talking about them. You know, God, thank you, God. You know, it's great days.
How important is the person diving with you? I mean,
extremely. Well,
to the point that you guys refuse to dive with certain people because of their ways?
So nothing against.
I mean, I'm just saying. I'm not trying. I'm just saying. There's people I don't fish with because I know the situation. Sometimes it puts me in a boat.
This is against no other diver. I'm not talking about any diver because all of us are. The second you start breathing underwater, you join a fraternity, right? So breathing underwater, making bubbles. So here's the thing. If you're going to do certain types of diving, you are many times safer with somebody that knows you, knows how you dive, knows your mannerisms, knows everything about how you dive and how you think and how you practice. And that just takes a lot of time, right? So most of your dive, I'll say PADI, and they tell you to dive with a buddy, right? So for the most part, if I'm diving on a boat full of guys that are new, the buddies to me are liabilities. So when we dive, we've trained ourselves more like a tech diver. You're diving with the systems and thoughts and process that you are your buddy. You're here to save yourself. Right. Don't put yourself in situations where you need a buddy. You know, you hear people talking about, you know, running out of air or gas. You know, that's rookie stuff. I mean, you got thousands of dives. There's no running out of air. You just the one thing you've got to have to survive. So if you're running out of air, you need to readjust your thought processes on how you dive with yourself.
Yeah, it better be because you're stuck on the bottom.
It'd have to be. You'd have to be entangled in some sort of entanglement to find. If somebody ever tells you that I ran out of gas on the bottom, you need to start doing some research. Something else.
Do some investigating.
Something else has happened.
Yeah.
But you know, so the thing about Stephen and I, which has always been ironic to me, so you can't talk underwater. And when we got some signals, we can tap on our tanks. We can wrap on a spear gun with a stringer to get attention. But we can go off, just dive after dive after dive, be out on live bottom. Us roll in, I'll break right, he breaks left. We're making our dive, and inevitably in this vast chasm of not being able to figure out where someone is, we meet each other on our safety and deco stops, time after time after time. It is the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Over and over again, it happens almost every time, and I think, you know, there's some subconscious element to that, but there's also, you know, I know if you beat me to the bottom, you're taking the down tide side. You're taking the easy route, which is, you know, the tide.
Oh, come on.
Well, I'd do the same thing, right? I mean, you're taking the down tide side, which means the tide's running that way down the ledge. Kent's going to run with the tide going down the ledge, and I'm going to take the up tide side.
See, English, the truth comes out. I knew that's why.
Right.
I knew that was going on.
Right, and vice versa, right? So if you think about just that one simple thing, I know that if I'm swimming up tide, when I'm done with my hunt on that ledge or on that wreck, all I got to do is turn my back, and I start drifting towards where Kent's going to do, you know, where Kent's going to end up, and he's going to do the same thing. He knows that if he's on the down tide side, he needs to put his face into the current and start slowly swimming into the current to end up, you know, approximately back where he is, where he came from. And at some point in time, even though we started out, I mean, you're in the middle of the ocean, we'll end up finding each other on the way to the surface. And I think that's just subconsciously and consciously you do those sort of things the more dives you have together.
I mean, I've got a lot of friends I've dove with over the years, some really good divers that were impressive in a lot of ways. The only person I've had that's just clicked like that has been us. You know, it's like I tell people all the time. You know, if we had to go, if I had picked my ideal dive trip, although I love diving with the rest of my guys, man, I got a bunch of good buddies that I love diving with. But if you said, what is your ideal day spearfishing? I would tell you a good captain that knows spearfishing, knows drift diving, somebody on the boat to help him with the stringers and just keep an eye out, right? And me and Goldie, and that's it. You know, the two of us just making repetitive dives over and over again, and that's a dream day off shore for me.
My thoughts are that the person in the boat is very important.
No doubt.
So here's the thing, though. Somebody could be a great billfish captain and catch more marlin, and that doesn't make them a good dive boat captain, especially with us, you know, drift diving. You know, we're not. Very rarely are we going to a piece of structure and saying, "Hey, look, you know, if we dive a shipwreck, we're out at the Hebe or the Vermilion or whatever, we may say, hey, look, we're going to put a down line and we'll come back up the down line." But even that's rare.
I had side scan sonar following him. When he was down, and it worked out so perfect. I mean, so we had the trolling motor, and it was slick though. I can't imagine, you know, being out there in a 35, 32, whatever footer in a rougher ocean where obviously I couldn't. I mean, finding the bubbles and everything else would be tough. Because, I mean, I got some unbelievable video of it.
White caps.
The bubbles were like, I mean, where we were seeing the bubbles and then where he was showing up on the sonar was like, they weren't even close. Like, he's way back there and his bubbles are down.
Well, the bubbles come up quite slowly, actually. You think they come racing up. So what the tide is just taking them and bending them. Yeah. And the other crazy thing that you realize is the tide could be running, you know, right as you're getting the changes of tides. The tides on the top could be running, you know, northeast, and the tide on the bottom running southeast, and you actually see a curve of the bubbles. Or if you go down a drop buoy where you're running a spool off buoy, the line have a belly in it. You know, buoy's pulling hard on the top to the northeast, and you go down and you think it's scoped out at a 45-degree angle, and it's not. It's a big curve.
Which you know, a lot of so. Take fishermen that are listening to this. Take that, think about it. A lot of times you got to think about which way your bait's drifting. A lot of times you got to think about which way your boat is positioned. Think about that, what we just told you, because we've seen it with our own eyes. There are a lot of times when the top tide is moving differently from the bottom tide.
Yep.
Okay? If you're in 150 feet of water bottom fishing, you could be moving 2 knots on top, and the bottom water be moving 2 knots in the other direction.
You know, one thing that we really learned, I'd say a hard lesson, when we were doing some of the salvage stuff with the salvage boat. You know, we're sitting there blowing from the surface, you know, blowing 9,500 feet down, and you think that you cleared a spot. You know, you're looking at your GPS, you got your antenna dead over the top of the blowers, and you think that you've cleared a spot exactly here, and if you actually get in the water and watch the column go down, you've actually cleared a spot that's 75 feet to the north.
Yeah.
Right? Wow. So you look at these maps where people got a grid and they're putting an X saying they cleared this spot and they cleared this spot, and they're marking them off as cleared because the GPS was there. That doesn't mean that the column of water landed there on the bottom. Which is a whole nother. If you think bottom fishing or getting set up scope of line for a boat to drift right back over a ledge with wind and tide considerations is difficult, try blowing on the bottom from the surface. It's a whole nother level.
So what we're talking about for you listeners out there that might not know, a salvage boat has a big fan on the back. Salvage boat has a big fan on the back.
Well, it's so basically think about it like a tube that is connected, pushes up against the back underneath the helm of the boat, the stern of the boat, and it connects to the screws screw on the back of the boat, a giant prop.
Yep.
The tube redirects the prop wash down instead of out. Okay, traditionally prop wash is running out the back of the boat to push the boat forward. The prop wash is shooting straight down.
Okay.
To blow sand away from a shipwreck.
They're actually called prop wash diverters.
Prop wash diverter. There you
How
go.
how long does I mean how deep is that effective?
Well, that's a great question.
So it depends.
We could talk about this for a long.
So you could have 3 more shows on that, and it was something that was really fun to learn and study and figure out. But again, if you've got tide that's moving the water column,
right,
much less depth. One, the distance it takes for it to get to the bottom is further, and it's also it's dissipating the water pressure because the tide's breaking it up. If you were to think about, and then also too if it's rough, if the boat's rocking around on the surface. So if you were to take a 16 penny nail and you're going to nail it through a 2x4, if you hit that nail over and over again, don't even have to hit it hard, but as long as you're hitting it, making contact, it goes through. It goes all the way to the bottom of where the flange on the head is, right? Same thing, if you've got a rough sea, imagine that water column just pushing pressure down, will rock the boat around. Now you're missing the nail.
Right.
So you have completely changed how much pressure is getting to the bottom. Slick day, we've blown the sand off to the bedrock in 140 feet. 3 foot day, 85 feet. Yeah, 6 foot day, go home.
So I can remember when we first got everything dialed in, and we went to a place in 140 feet of water to blow an old historical shipwreck. And when we went overboard, we didn't know how this was going to work. Right, we had no idea whether or not it was going to work. Nobody had ever blown that deep. And when we got in the ocean, it was crystal clear, and you could see white bedrock 140 feet down, and it just blew my mind.
Wow.
One of the neat things about that particular location, though, the sand was probably
very shallow,
14 to 18 inches deep.
Yeah.
So it was like dusting off. It was like spraying off your driveway with a water hose. It wasn't that difficult. If you've got to dig deeper in the sand, it becomes substantially harder.
Well, and the sand depths off of our coast vary greatly. I mean, we had a site that we blew sand it started out in 78 feet of water, and it ended up in 100 feet of water.
It seems like the sand was around 18 to 22 feet deep, I think, was about the best we could discern how much sand that we blew off. And so there, in a situation like that, as you're blowing it down, it kind of does like a mushroom cloud and builds a wall.
Looks like a bowl, like you're sitting at a bowl.
Right, like a bowl. So you almost have to use the tide to your advantage, right, in that situation. So you blow a hole, it makes a hole, but then it makes a ledge around the top. So now as the tide turns, you blow some of that sand away so you can go back down and blow the hole again. Any kid that liked playing with Legos and toys and had an engineering mind that gets into something like that will have a field day as long as it's not his credit card paying right.
Yeah, I hear it is pretty expensive.
All right, let's get back to spearfishing for a second, because you started getting off on drift diving, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to think that's crazy, because I hear that from people all the time. Like, why don't you put down an anchor? So I'll let you answer that. Why don't we put down anchors?
So there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of reasons there. So when we drift dive, Stephen was saying a minute ago how one of us could go down tide, the other one go up tide. Well, if we do it right, we both kind of ease down tide,
Right.
So if you've got a bigger spot of not necessarily a ledge, more like live bottom where you can go parallel to each other down tide.
Yeah.
You start on the up tide side. You make sure your captain knows the basic direction you're heading, and you roll off up tide and you just kind of ease along. Not a lot of kicking, not a lot of breathing, not a lot of clanging, and you just kind of float down tide, and hopefully right where you fall in is the key spot. Now, a lot of times we'll see places that we've dove before and we know really well, and there may be you want to fall and hit this exact spot, right? You come in from the left, I come in from right, and we'll both hit this spot, and it may be twice the size of this desk in front of us. But other times you may be on live bottom where you're just going to kind of ease around over it like you're mowing the grass. You on one mower, me on the other, going the same direction. If you do something like that and the boat's anchored up, the idea of swimming back up tied to the boat is a ridiculous amount of effort. You know, the more physical exertion you have under the water, the more susceptible you are to some of these other things like getting bent. And then, two, let's say we get off from the boat a bit and the boat's anchored up. Well, you know, you can untie the rope, clear the lines, get a poly ball on the anchor, all that stuff, all the while we're drifting away.
If you can see us.
Right. So,
or hear us.
I am, back to what we said originally, I'm 1,000 times more happy with a captain that knows what we're doing and is part of the team. It's not just a boat captain that can navigate a boat. We're talking about a guy that knows what we're doing and how to work with us. And they can follow us. It's much less work on us. You're not as worried about having drifted away from the boat, whereas you come up and now you're out of sight, or God forbid, far enough away that the boat can't hear you if you blow a whistle or a horn. And it's safer. I mean, it's truly safer. Now, you don't want to pick up a captain at the local bait store that morning that's never done it and go hop off the boat, especially if the water's aerated. You know, it's rough enough that you're getting a little bit of white caps. Now, if it's completely slick, you know, we could probably pick up a kid at the middle school to do that. But as soon as you get some chop on the water, now it becomes challenging. You need somebody that knows what they're looking for. You know, on the bottom machine, they know what they're looking for with their eyes. They know what. They also understand that the drift of the boat's not the drift of the diver, right? So one thing that we tell people, you know, let's say you get new people on the boat that are helping out. You got a new hand or a mate, whatever you want to call them. You say, look, you know, if you ever lose a diver here and you cannot find them, you go back to the buoy that we went down on. You take this extra set of dive gear and you tie it to a poly ball. And you drop it in the water.
Yep.
So that way you've got a set of dive gear that's 5-6 feet under the water floating. You've got a poly ball on top that's not drastically affected by the wind. A little bit. The waves are going to catch the poly ball a little bit. But for the most part, if you drop it at the original down spot, the original mark, the original buoy, and you now have a heading on where your diver went, right? The heading that the boat drifts is completely different because the waves and the wind have much more effect on the boat than they do on the diver. You know, the tide's what's doing the diver.
Right, and the other thing is it gets extra complicated when the sun is getting either coming up on the horizon or going down on the horizon. You've got, you know, if you've got a little bit of swell or a little bit of white cap and you got a sun on the horizon, going down on the horizon's really the worst. Going down on the horizon, if you got a captain that doesn't know what he's doing and you got a tide that's running 2 or 3 knots, you got a recipe for disaster. I always tell captains that are about to pick me up or drop me off, I always tell them, look, what I do, I figure out the drift of the bubbles. I get ahead of that drift and put myself between the sun and the bubbles. And that's where you position the boat. Every single time you put yourself between the sun and the bubbles. Because if you put yourself behind the bubbles, looking at the sun,
can't see them.
You can't see them. And before you know it, the bubbles are gone and you're making circles and you're chasing a ghost. You're chasing a ghost, and that's a dangerous place to be. So you got to have somebody. I know we've reiterated it about a dozen times. You got to have somebody that understands the way the ocean works and understands this system.
So it's kind of funny though. So you get back to the dock and you're talking to people and they realize that you dive, or they realize you do a lot of diving, and you always get the question, you aren't scared of sharks? And the answer is always the same thing. No, I'm scared of getting left.
Scared of getting left every single time, every day of the week. Put me in a pool full of sharks, but do not put me in the ocean by myself. That's a bad place to be.
That's what would scare me.
That's a bad place to be. And both of us have been there. I've been left. He's been left for.
I've been left for a minute. I got found pretty quickly. One of us got left until in the night.
I got left for hours. But it is not a good place to be when it starts getting dark and you're floating in the ocean. Your mind goes to bad places. And
there's a simple rule on the boat too. If for some reason you lose a diver, and I'm speaking mostly for myself, if you lose me and you're the boat captain, or you're on the boat, right? You're there helping make the group decisions on what to do next. You better have put a set of dive gear and a polyball in the water. Mm-hmm. You better have called the Coast Guard. And when they find me, you better be out there looking for me still too.
You better be there.
Don't let me find out you left and nobody found me yet.
You better be there till you run out of gas.
Yes, sir. Coast Guard drop me off, I'll start looking for you.
Yep, exactly. That's that. Boy, if you want to know something that'll make me fight, is somebody that will leave me.
Hey, when he got in the water that night, me and Mike Brady looked at, or the second dive, me and Mike looked at each other. We're like, dude, what if something happens? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna put you in this life jacket up there, drop you in the water. I'm gonna throw the anchor out. You hold the rope. I'll run, go try to get help. we'll figure it out. We had it all figured out.
Look here.
No, we didn't have any other gear.
I'm gonna promise you something.
Hey, we didn't have any other gear.
You just take a tank. All you gotta do is take a tank and make sure you tie it good around the head. The tank does the same thing. I'm gonna promise you something. We all friends and we all boys, but if we lose somebody, nobody's dropping me on the buoy line with a life jacket to go get help.
No. All right, let's talk about technicalities of spearfishing now. So everybody does it a little bit differently. I think you and I probably do it more similarly than differently. But when you approach a fish, let's say we've already – let me back up. We've always said there's sort of a hierarchy of fish.
For sure.
Okay, talk to me about what you think that – I don't want to tell everybody what that is. I want you to tell me what you think that is. What's the hierarchy of fish? And what I mean by that is when you hit the bottom, and we're on a live bottom or on a ledge or on a wreck, when you hit the bottom and you're looking at the menu, right? You got a red snapper here, you got a scamp here, you got a gag here, you got a hogfish here, you got triggerfish in the water column, a pompano in the water column.
Right.
What are you shooting first?
So being that we're here, we're talking about home, right? So, a diver from the middle grounds in Florida might disagree.
Yeah, sure.
But here, home.
Yeah, here.
So it all depends. If I pass a pompano on the way down.
Yeah, see, I threw that in there to confuse you.
You didn't confuse me. So, I mean, if I pass, it all depends. If you're traveling to the bottom and you pass something, especially something that's rare, you don't see a lot of pompano on ledges.
And when we say pompano, we mean African pompano.
Right, African pompano.
Yep.
But if I roll off the boat, there's an African pompano there. He should have followed another boat.
Exactly.
If he's decent, and unless he's a juvenile, and then. Again, as we're traveling down, we run across some cobia or, God forbid, mahi or something. I'm gonna go with those too.
Sure.
But once we get within sight of the bottom, if we're sitting there looking, and there's big gags, you need to dispense with the big gags first because they're the spookiest, right? The snapper and the scamps and, God forbid, the hogfish, they'll hang around a while longer, So I would normally say I'm going after the big gags first. Once I get what I want there, I'm going to back down. I'm going to probably go after the larger scamps. If snapper season's in, I might deal with the snapper next. And then the hogfish, because the hogfish will wait for you. Especially if you're kicking up some sand or you grab a couple of lobster, they may even come over and hang out with you.
More will usually show up. So I always believe that activity sort of increases activity, if that makes sense. Activity begets activity. In some cases, not
in some cases, yeah.
In some cases, it does. If there's not hardly anything going on a piece of bottom, activity definitely begets activity. Then, right? If you're just sort of looking at bottom and you're seeing nothing but 8-pound, 10-pound scamps, little hogfish, shoot a scamp. Let him get in the sand, dust it up, figure out what's going on, and if you don't have a hogfish there in a few minutes, catch a lobster. Another trick that you and I have always used over the years, if you see a lobster on a piece of bottom that there's nothing going on, you pick him up, break off his legs. He'll do that. He'll do our lobster around here. I don't know if rock lobster or spot or what are they called? The ones up north. I don't know if
cold water
lobsters do it, but our lobsters here, spotty lobsters, they make a.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, they grunt.
It's a weird noise. It sounds sort of like a baby alligator. underwater, and you can almost feel it.
How'd that sound again? Yeah, there you go. Very good.
And you can almost feel it. It's like a vibration almost,
Wow.
And the hogfish go nuts over that. And if you hold on to one and, break a piece of his leg off and you get him going, the hogfish will show up. And especially if you drop the legs in one little spot and you dust it up and you come back there 5 or 10 minutes from there. If there's not a hogfish, then you leave.
A lot of times they'll grab a lobster and just hold it, not even having any intentions of keeping it. Just hold it by the back of its shell, right over where the shell goes to the tail, and he'll constantly try to get off,
Yep.
And you hold him in a manner that he thinks he's probably going to get off, and let him fight, and just swim around for a second and then drop him.
Yep.
I'm not as big on lobsters as Stephen is, so I'll pick them up, make them make some noise, and I'll drop them right back down a lot of times. Yeah, it's a lot of neat little things that you learn how to do and see what goes on. And, and listen to other divers' stories. You hear other people talk about it. I still, my mind always goes back to my impression, though. When we first started this conversation, we were talking about, felt like we became better fishermen through all of this.
Yep.
Because, I'm not gonna lie, I thought I knew it all about reading a bottom machine and going fishing. I caught a bunch of fish.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I knew.
Well, so back where we started, reading a bottom machine is where we started this thing. If you see a group of fish on the bottom and they're, let's say they're 3 feet off the bottom or right on the bottom, and there's 4 or 5 of them together, do you immediately say, grouper, snapper? What do you say to yourself? And then so what about the single fish that's 8 foot off the bottom, or the group of fish that's 40 feet off the bottom?
Yep.
I mean, what's your take on those? I mean, traditionally, where do the fish that we're looking for stage?
Well, I usually say that's a snapper right there, but I'm picking on somebody.
Right.
I usually look more, instead of paying so much attention to the fish that are on the ledge, I look for the type of bottom that's around it.
Yeah.
We all the time, if we're on a boat, you'll hear us, we make all kind of funny statements, but you look at a fuzzy bottom, if you got a small little ledge with some fuzz around it, fuzzy bottom.
Craggy bottom,
fuzzy bottom.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll go down and you see these big blow-ups, look at all this bait. A lot of times that's exactly what that is. It's a big pot of bait, and you can swim down there and swim around with the bait.
Yep.
Sometimes you'll look, and it'll be a fuzzy little bottom, and you swim down there, and there's a couple of the most beautiful fish you've ever seen in your life, and not a pile of bait. I think that one thing that happens, I think this is one thing that makes a good guide, by the way. If you go regularly, and you're fishing regularly, and you know what the spots did last year and the year before that and the year before that, and you're keeping up with it, right?
Right.
If you see a big pile of bait on ledges in 140-foot range and it's May, and the last couple of Mays, that 140-foot ledge had the big grouper moving in as the water just was, or moving out just as the water was starting to warm up. Whatever, you catch them through that transition period, and you're pulling back into your memory. We used to take a lot of notes. If you look at our old handheld dive computers, I say handhelds, our portable dive computers, our portable GPSs, we used to put notes, too big snapper, the date, the water temperature, all that stuff. And then over the years, we quit doing that so much, but you remember, it's kind of like an elephant. I might not remember who I talked to at the gas station that morning, but I remember what we shot on that ledge 14 years ago.
Right. No, so great point. Fuzzy bottom, craggy bottom, fuzzy bottom, and anybody that's spent any time looking at a bottom machine, I think, sort of knows what we're talking about. So I'm not going to define what fuzzy bottom looks like. But fuzzy bottom traditionally has, the ability, at least in my experience, to hold more hogfish and snapper type fish. Craggy bottom, which a lot of times you'll never identify until you see it.
Right.
Which, by the way, so a lot of times craggy bottom will look like nothing on the bottom machine, and then you go look at it and you realize it's got 6 or 8 feet of relief. It's just that the cracks are only about 1 foot to 2 feet across.
The echo doesn't get down into the crack.
And the echo's
so a lot of times you'll see a bottom. So again, I remember hearing captains say, "Oh, this is rock bottom right here. Look how thick the purple is, or look how thick the red is." Well, a lot of times what you're looking at there is cracks. So people are going to laugh at me right now, but still to this day on my boat, I use a digital Furuno 585 because I have looked at a digital Furuno 585 so many times over the years. I know exactly what I'm looking at with it. You get on somebody else's boat and they got the brand new whatever, and it takes me a minute. I have to look at that. I have to look at that bottom machine, go look at it with my eyes, and I do that. And by the time I figure out it's the end of the day, and now the next trip I'm better with the equipment.
So exactly right. But when you're looking at bottom, the differences in bottom, as you said, the different kinds of bottom, the terrain that you're looking at, oftentimes will dictate the territory for that fish, the kind of fish that enjoys that kind of territory.
Right.
It's the kind of habitat he likes, right? So traditionally, the snapper like a live bottom type of a bottom. The hogfish like a live bottom type of a bottom. Red snapper have taken over everywhere. So, I mean,
we've got a red snapper issue here.
Yeah, and we can talk about that for days, certainly, and the problems there. But snapper like a live bottom type of a scenario. Scamps, I've found, and gags too, but scamps especially, like that craggy bottom where they can come, jut in and out of the cracks, and they pop in and out. And it's sort of weird looking because if you get to a bottom, when you're diving, if you get to a bottom, a lot of times it'll look dead. I mean, a craggy bottom, it'll look completely dead. And then all of a sudden, there's 8 or 10 scamps that have just popped out of nowhere, and then they're back in. And so, a piece of bottom you go over with your boat, you can imagine. You go over with your boat, you're looking at a bottom machine, desolate, looks like nothing. And then you come back by 5 minutes later, there's 8 or 10 big scamps that have popped out of the cracks. So a piece of bottom that looks like nothing is not always nothing. I mean, it's probably worth dropping a piece of bait on, especially if you've caught a fish there in the past and you've made a note of it.
But you ride over one time. So I've seen people say, well, I rode over here a minute ago and there was a piece of structure and I can't find it again.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what you saw was some fish coming out of some cracks and they're back in. A lot of times, and not every time.
That's awesome. That's a good explanation.
A lot of times.
Yeah. So how about on a wreck? So we've got lots of wrecks, some artificial, some natural. How about on a wreck? Where do you traditionally find the target species on a wreck?
Well, wreck dives and spearfishing on wrecks is fun, but it's not my.
It's not your cup of tea.
It's not my first go-to if we're going spearfishing. Now, it depends on what wreck. Everyone's different. They all have different personalities. They hold different fish. Again, it's just like we were talking about a minute ago. If you've got a live bottom and you know exactly where the spot is, I mean, I don't want to call any specific wrecks, but there's certain wrecks that I drop the buoy right in a certain spot and I'm going right to a certain hole very first thing. Yep. And then we'll check the rest of the wreck out,
That's right.
We got, there's a couple of big ledges out, going right back to a ledge. That shows you how much I like them, but there's a ledge that we found that's out in about 200 feet of water just before you get to the Georgetown Hole, kind of that top rim around the Georgetown Hole. There is it's like an elevator shaft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if the whole ledge is huge, but this one little elevator shaft, it's like water pressure blew at the bottom of the wall to the point where it washed an elevator shaft in the side of this wall. And we go straight to that hole every single time. Yep. Somebody go to the bottom, somebody stay on the top, and whoever gets the cabera, is usually the guy on the top. But
first full moon in May, by the way, which is coming up.
So you get spots like that on these wrecks that you'll go to. Some wrecks are, for whatever reason, they'll hold different fish. I remember we would go out to Hebe and the St. Cathans and just have tons and tons of huge scamps, big old broomtails. And you turn around and you go to, you come in and you go to I don't know, the anchor wreck, the anchor wreck always had big gags on it. And it's kind of changed now. If you go out there, those scamps aren't on those wrecks like they used to be. There's fish on them, but you'll have stuff showing up that you didn't see before. You have a lot of trigger fish and stuff like that wasn't on them 20 years ago like they are now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they do change over time. They evolve over time. And some of those wrecks hold African pompano. I'm not going to tell you which ones. You got to go figure that out on your own. But some of those wrecks hold African pompano. But what you said, I thought was fairly indicative for our diving and maybe indicative for fishermen as well. Wrecks are our go-to thing, right? I mean, they're not.
No. So I usually hit wrecks when I've got 3 or 4 people trying to dive, right? If it's just me and you, I like to get out on our ledges, get out and live bottom. The wrecks to me, especially if you are a newer diver, are the odds of you losing somebody off a wreck are way, way less. Like to the point where the dive shops don't even take people out to live bottom much anymore. As a matter of fact, our local dive shop here in Merle's Inlet, owner's a great guy. I remember him telling me, I'm done with taking people to live bottoms. You take 12 divers out to live bottom and you're hunting 5 of them, 4 of them, and it's just too much of a liability. Right. The wrecks, if people go down and you go down a down line, you hit midship and there's a big bowler sitting there. It's a very identifiable thing, where live bottom, unless you're really hyper aware of your surroundings, live bottom can blend in quickly.
Yeah, that sea fan looks like that sea fan that looks like that sea fan. Yep. Well, Kent, buddy, I wish we could do part 2.0.
We'll have to do part 2.0 of this one.
Yeah.
Bring somebody else in, too. I'd love to have old Rich. Yeah. I'd love to have old Rich join us.
I think we ought to get Rich to join us and
absolutely
talk about the videography side of this. But we need to get Kent back for every few episodes to sort of say, we need the diver's perspective. Maybe we ought to do our own little episode with Kent, the diver's perspective.
Well, I'm with you. I learned a lot. That day we went, like you telling me what was down there, like honestly, like I wanted to bring it up earlier, but Kent talking about, I hate those guys that try to tell every fish on the screen. They know every fish on the screen. You went down and you came back up and you're like telling us exactly what was down there, and I'm telling you, not even close to what I thought was down there was down there.
Yeah, that's right.
So, for sure. I mean, people that are so insistent, they know what an echo is. You're just going, there's something down there that the sounder sounded off of, but that's what's there.
That's right.
If you want to know for sure, follow me.
I'd really like to do one, maybe video, and come up and pull some different pictures from screens, from sounders, and have y'all talk about exactly like, all right, so this is what we think we saw.
Yeah.
And exactly what y'all see. Maybe we'll get something like that set up.
The diver's perspective.
Diver's perspective. I love it. How about that?
1
hour exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Well,
you're keeping us on the clock too good here, buddy.
Kent, you got anything to conclude us?
I think that what you guys were saying is awesome. I think we get Rich Taylor involved. For the person that wants to learn, who's not ready to dive, about the perspective. The diver's perspective.
Yeah.
Somebody that's as good at what they do as Rich Taylor is unbelievably valuable. So I've got some friends of mine and friends of Stephen's too, from Charlotte that wanted to get into diving and came down, him, his family, his name's Oliver, as cool as he can be. His boat's been sitting in my yard now for about 4 years. Everybody says I inherited a boat. But he lives in Charlotte, so it's just better to stay down here. But he got excited and interested because of Rich Taylor's videos. Right? So he would go find these videos that, it was usually me and Stephen in the videos, but Rich was the one doing the filming, and he watched them, and I ended up meeting him by accident. We got our hair cut at the same place in Pawleys Island, even though he's from Charlotte, and we bumped into each other. He's like, man, I've been watching your videos. And I was like, yeah, right. And then he starts describing, and I'm like, by the time he's done talking to me, I'm like, this guy's watched all of the videos. And then he starts telling me how watching the videos, he was better able to advise his son and daughter on how to safely dive. When they got offshore with other people, he was going, well, hang on a second, you guys. This is how I've seen people that do it a ton, and may have even, I'm not saying we did, but maybe just by that made his initial learning curve a safer one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. That would be the important part. Like, that would be the thing I would want.
If I was a well-prepared host, I would know what Rich Taylor's YouTube handle was. I don't have it, but I think it's RS
Taylor 100, I think.
RS Taylor 100 on YouTube. Look him up. He's got some great offshore South Carolina diving videos. Look him up. Give him some love. He's a great guy, and we're going to have him on the podcast here. Eagles, you want to take us out, buddy?
Yeah, man, let's get on out of here. I tell you what, folks, thanks to our wonderful sponsors once again for today's show, Kent Rogerson for coming in and hanging out with us. But you know what? It's always about the fins, fur, and feathers. Trilogy Outdoors Podcast is a product of Trilogy Outdoors Media. All views and opinions of our hosts and guests are not necessarily those of our sponsors. Trilogy Outdoors is produced and edited by Trilogy Outdoors Media. Be sure to follow us on all the podcast platforms as well as our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And also, don't forget our other brands, Southern English Radio Show and Walk 'Em All Outdoor Magazine. To find more information, visit TrilogyOutdoorsMedia.com. And remember, if it's anything dealing with fins, fur, and feathers, you're going to find it right here on Trilogy Outdoors.